Let's get things started. Hey guys, Hattopy here. At this point in time, I've managed to finally play through pretty much most of the Fire Emblem games readily available to me, save for one, but I just really haven't had the ambition to go and try that. But one pair of games that I've wanted to actually play quite a bit and acquire were the Tellius games, Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. Through eBay, I was able to get a hold of Radiant Dawn relatively cheap, but as of Path of Radiance, though, yeah, so I guess I ain't going to play that anytime soon. I'll be keeping my hopes up to eventually play Path of Radiance for a half-decent price, but for now, I was able to play through Radiant Dawn, so without further ado, let's take a look at Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. So Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn starts out with Micaiah and a returning Soth evading Benyon forces within Dayan. It's been 3 years since the Mad King's War, and the country of Dayan has been under constant oppression from the occupying Benyon forces. Micaiah and Soth are part of the Dawn Brigade, a resistance group trying to free Dayan and allow them to be an independent country again. Along the way, they discover the lost heir to Dayan's throne, Mad King Ashnard's lost son Peleus. Thanks to his status and Micaiah's uncanny ability to rally those around her to fight harder, you can eventually fight back for Dayan's freedom and claim independence for the citizens. Along the way, you'll recruit a colorful cast of characters, both new and returning, hone your combat skills, and devise unique tactical strategies to gain the upper hand on the enemy. But that's not the only story being told in this adventure, as you eventually also take control of the newly named Queen Elincia and the Crimean Royal Knights, fighting to prevent an all-out civil war against those who dislike and want to usurp Elincia as queen. As well, you eventually take control of the returning Grail mercenaries, led by Ike, contracted by the Laguz Alliance, in aiding them in a new conflict they must deal with. Through these stories, you might aid some of these different armies in their troubles, or you may even come face to face with those you yourself have worked to train with already, all the while uncovering the secrets that continue to surround Tellius. Now, a lot of the Fire Emblems that I've played follow the same idea of a 3-arc structure. Awakenings, Echoes, Blazing Sword, kind of. And Radiant Dawn is no different, although it would be 4 rather than 3. But what I like about how this game tells its story is that you command 3 different armies, all with their own conflicts, but all of them heavily coinciding with each other's stories. And as I implied, Micaiah and the Dawn Brigade actually get to battle against Ike and the Grail mercenaries a few times, taking control of one side depending on the specific mission, giving you the opportunity to adjust some of these levels' difficulties based upon how you perform with each army, though some have more control than others. More on that a little bit later. And even with the general plot, as wonky as it can get since you control units on opposing sides, it does allow for a more in-depth perception of what each army's ideals, beliefs, and ambitions are, creating a more unique world to partake in. And even though it is a sequel, the game does a fairly good job at giving you a very condensed outlook at what had happened in the previous game. That way newcomers don't feel completely left in the dark, while I feel, at least, not being intrusive and unnecessary to returning players. Graphically, obviously, since it's a console game, it looks far and away more realistic than any of the portable games. I would argue that the aesthetics of the GBA games I found to be just as enjoyable, but that's mostly subjective. If I was to compare this to the other games not in 16-bit though, I would go as far as to say that if it wasn't for Echoes, Radiant Dawn would probably be the best looking game in the series. There's lots of colors, unique animations, and style for each and every class and unit, and a wide array of classes to utilize in the first place. Musically though, it's about middle of the road. Most of it just sounds atmospheric and nothing more. And even most of the battle themes don't do a whole lot, though I will say, despite me not even playing Path of Radiance, although I have known about the Black Knight through other means, the first time you get to play him early on in Micaiah's chapters, and just hearing his theme upon entering into battle, it just left me with a feeling of like, yeah, he's about to wreck some fools. Now onto the gameplay. It's kind of funny since with a lot of the Fire Emblem games, I haven't really had a whole lot to talk about with the gameplay since if you played one, you've played the vast majority of them, only with maybe some minor changes. But Radiant Dawn actually has quite a few combat changes to go through. The game does still follow the tried and true weapon triangle like usual, though now these units are accompanied by the Lagoos, humanoid like beings that can transform into different creatures like wolves, lions, cats, hawks, ravens, herons, and dragons. There have been beast form like units in other Fire Emblem games I've talked about, but these ones are unique in that they don't need beast stones to transform, but rather have to charge a meter to max before being able to transform, and then being forced to revert back to human form when it gets depleted, with some exceptions. In their human forms, they can't wield weapons nor initiate combat, though they can counter, but at the cost of being at heavily reduced stats. However, when they are transformed, holy, does this become interesting. They get buffed stats far and away exceeding those of most other units, though they do gain heavily reduced EXP for a lot of battles they partake in, making them kind of hard to train. And since they don't go through class changes, their levels capped at 40 rather than the usual 20 for regular units. But while we're on that subject, a feature that I really liked in this game, and has seemingly really only been in this one, is that although level caps at 20 for regular units, if you can level up a unit one more time after that, they can go through a class change without the need for a master seal. They do still exist if you want to promote before 20, and God knows you would have to do it for some missions, but it's nonetheless a really awesome feature to have since it now allows everyone to have the potential to do really great things rather than sacrificing items to promote other units. And to help with all that is that you can earn bonus experience after each map, and at your base you can distribute that experience any way you like, helping out with units that may have lagged behind for whatever reason, or superpowering your favorites. It's at your base as well that you can shop for new items, make new weapons, and apply skills to your units. I find that money kind of comes at somewhat inconvenient times though, and making weapons is locked at certain times to certain armies as well, making that an unreliable asset. For regular items, you're probably better off buying in advance for your units, and then maybe, if you feel like you have enough left over and you found the perfect time for the forge to be there, you can make custom weapons with different stats based on how much money you put into them. This is an excellent option for those who need the extra hand early on in the game, or even for those that underperform in the late game. Here is also where you can equip different skills that you've acquired onto your units. Each skill has a number allocated to them, and each unit can equip a limited number of skills based on their numbers. Skills vary from affecting stats to allowing units to heal automatically, or locked in skills based on that specific unit. This feature showed up in later Fire Emblem games, but here is when I find it to be the most accessible and forgiving since non-locked skills can be interchangeable with other characters. It is here that you can set up supports as well. Anyone can support with whoever you want, but it is locked to only one potential support. In combat though, it's pretty effective since a unit can be 4 spaces away and still apply the bonuses, that of which varies depending on the pairing. The unfortunate thing about pairings is that there are no true support conversations. When each unit reaches their threshold to upgrade their support rank, all they have during a match is a single text blurb that is the same pretty much for each unit with the name swapped out. It leaves little for potential character development, saving those for back at the base, where in between missions, different scenarios can play out depending on who's alive, and each scenario potentially giving out a reward. But they don't feel like enough, especially for the amount of units that you can recruit in this game. Now back on the battlefield. Something fairly unique to this game is height advantage. If a unit is in a higher spot and attacks another unit, they pretty much always hit their attacks, with the person on the lower end almost always missing theirs. It's a great way to train some units with bad hit rates, though it's a real pain when you have to try and go up against them from the bottom. Overall though, it's not a bad thing in the grand scheme of things. Now we get on to the few things that make this game really frustrating to play. For starters, I'm aware of the translation issues and how much people freaked out over this game. Rather than it being normal, hard, and lunatic, like with other Fire Emblem games, this one had easy, normal, and hard, which To be fair, for me, it didn't really matter because I wanted to play on what this game considered to be its middle difficulty. And to be very fair, a lot of this game isn't really all that hard on normal difficulty most of the time. The problems lie in a few things that sort of compound into each other. For starters, a lot of these maps are massive, with most having lots of reinforcements, causing some very long playtimes per map. That's not a huge problem, though it does mean that if you end up making any mistakes at the end of the map, which is usually when it happens, it takes a lot of time to end up recovering back to that point. There is a remedy of sorts, but I'll get into that in a second. Next is that the first act of the game, when you take control of the Dawn Brigade, gets to be fairly difficult, especially considering the map sizes, goals to win, large enemy sizes, and the pitiful amounts to your ranks. It forces players to use units like Soth, Volog, and Torneo a lot in order to win, despite my wanting to use some of the other units on my team. Bonus experience does somewhat remedy this, but you lose out on a lot of the really juicy experience since a lot of my units couldn't duel very well. That causes issues for a later portion of the game as, like I said, there are numerous maps in the third chapter where you either take control of the Grail Mercenaries or the Dawn Brigade combating against the other team. Now, if you play as the Grail Mercenaries, that's not a huge issue, since when you first play as them, they're all at least second tier units, well-rounded, and are all strong on top of it. The Dawn Brigade, however, after finishing the first chapter, have been used very little by this point in the game and are probably mostly still pre-promoted units, probably a few second tier ones that were forced to be in that state with a Master Steel, so they'll still be fairly weaker than most, making the missions between the two armies lopsided in difficulty. Finally, there's the fact that the game itself actually seems to neglect a lot of the units that you can actually acquire in the game. Units like Tormod, Vika, Joffrey, etc., and even a lot of the other regular cast members, since the game jumps between armies on numerous occasions, making them feel like you hardly ever find the time to use them enough to truly find their strengths and weaknesses, or end up finding someone else to use along the way to replace them before they have a chance to return. Vika was easily one of my favorite Lagoos I used early on in the game, and was really looking forward to using her. However, after the first act, she doesn't reappear until right at the tail end of the game, making her largely unusable by then. All that said, there is a sort of loophole. See, Echoes had Milla's Turnwheel, which was a perfect middle ground for those who will accept casualties and those who reset maps upon losing a unit, giving you a chance to take back moves, but in limited quantities. Another tool other Fire Emblem games had was bookmarks, allowing you to save your current map in the state it's in and come back to it later if you needed to stop. That causes the game to pause no matter what, and you couldn't change that. What Radiant Dawn has is something else. It has battle saves, which creates a save of the situation that you are in, allowing you to come back to that point whenever you like. This can completely negate everything I just mentioned earlier, since you could influence battles to your liking, change a fighter in battles to suit your experience grinding needs, and lessen the times taken to finish maps by making a save whenever needed. This largely makes the game easier in the regard that unless you entirely devote yourself to letting yourself live with your failures, you can never make errors that'll cost you much. It's a cheap crutch that I've tried my hardest to avoid using, though I'll admit I did use it on a few maps since I didn't want a 90% hit chance missing or an enemy's 2% crit chance activating, ruining a map that I've already spent over an hour and a half on. All that just to keep my sanity. I say easier, though with the douchey reinforcement patterns you get near the end of the game, I'd say that Radiant Dawn is probably one of the more frustrating games in the series. All in all though, if whether you used the crutch or tried to play the game as straight as possible, I still enjoyed my time with Radiant Dawn, with one of the better stories in the series, the largest maps and the largest objective varieties, and one of the largest casts of members that you can recruit, meaning that you'll no doubt find someone that you'll really like to play as. Like Meg! Yeah, right. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn is easily one of the better games in the series. Now, to just try and find Path of Radiance. $600! Holy! But anywho, thank you all so much for watching. If you like what you saw, you can click right up there to check out some of my other videos. Or, if you really feel like it, you can click right up there to subscribe. And until next time, guys, I will see you all later.